What's up?
How you doing, man?
Good, good. Nice to
It
have you
is
on the
so,
podcast. So,
yeah, thank you for inviting me. I've been dying to talk to you about some things.
oh,
I
great.
think you and I are sort of kindred spirits in a way. We kind of talk about the same things online on LinkedIn.
Yeah,
Um,
and on Substack.
and yeah, and on Substack. And I'm a big fan of the show as one of the few kind of like data specific shows
Oh,
that
thank you.
talks about concepts and ideas and things that actually are relevant in the data engineering space.
Cool.
So
Thank you.
very excited to be here. Very quite excited to be here.
That's awesome. Let me start out then, I guess, for people who don't know who you are, do you want to give a quick intro?
Yeah, so my name is Ergest Xheblati. I'm originally from Albania, but I've lived in the
Nice.
US for the past 2.5 decades or so. I have a background in computer science, so I started sort of like a software engineer. I decided early on that that wasn't quite for me. And for maybe a couple of years, I didn't know what to do with myself. So I went back to school, got an MBA. And then that kind of helped me with some connections to get a job as a business analyst. And it's sort of that's my sort of my love story with data and my love story with SQL. It began sometimes around 2006, and
Nice.
it's been going on ever since. So if you do the math, I'm sort of dating myself here, but if you do the math, it's like 18 years or so. I don't even want to calculate how far back it was. But then I've sort of navigated the data scene from working like on-prem databases like SQL Server, etc., to then working with cloud, uh, from working on like private companies that were like in the tourism space to working in tech companies to basically I've moved around in the space, but always around the topic of data. And I've tried all the different sort of careers inside of data. So I was a data analyst for a while. I started as a business analyst, became a data analyst, and didn't quite like it. I tried data science and machine learning, did a couple of projects, didn't quite like it. I tried product management in data, didn't quite like it. Always seemed to go back to data engineering. That's sort of my default setting. So I've been in this space ever since, and I'm still in this space. So that's sort of my background. To just sort of to summarize the last however many years it is.
It's a long time. And you've didn't you write a book on SQL patterns as well and stuff like that?
So yeah, so I also authored a book about 2 years ago on things that I had seen. So the interesting story with the book is I looked into the space of SQL books, and there are thousands of them, but they all teach you the elements of the language, how to write queries that query data. I was using SQL to do data transformation and to build data workflows, right? That transform data in multiple stages and multiple steps. And I noticed that both data engineers, sorry, I mean, both data analysts and data scientists would write these super complex queries. It would get them the result that they wanted, but the query was unmaintainable, unreadable. It took forever to run. And so when they would commit it to a Git repository for automatic processing, sort of like we had like a free DBT workflow at one of my previous companies, I was checking their code. And even for me to understand what they were doing, I often had to refactor the query, had to rewrite it by using CTEs, by using so I doing this enough times, I noticed that I'm like, oh, but there's something here. There's some knowledge that I have brought in from software engineering, these design patterns that they talk a lot about, like the open and close principle, the single responsibility principle, etc. And I was using them in SQL. So I thought that there was like a wedge in there where I can write something that takes SQL and applies software engineering principles to it. And so I started it as a thread on Twitter. It went kind of viral for me. And I decided, okay, I'm just going to write a book on it and see what happens. And it's been pretty successful. Maybe not as successful as Fundamentals of Data Engineering, but at least for me, it has helped me build an audience, build kind of a brand for myself online. And I'm still proud of the book. I still get messages from people saying, hey, man, I loved your book. I used it to prepare for a data engineering interview,
That's
or I
cool.
used it to, I used it to check myself to see how much I had learned on SQL. So I see it as like, like a mid-level, if you're like a mid-level career person and you want to kind of improve your skills, especially in the SQL space, it's a good resource.
That's super cool. And yeah, getting those kind of messages from people is awesome to see
Yeah.
that like your book's actually, having an impact, and helping people.
Yeah,
It's
it's just
super,
amazing to see like the return on investment for somebody who goes from like not having a job as a data engineer, let's say, to using my videos, and which are free on YouTube, by the way, and the book, and basically get a job that pays them a very good salary. I see that as 10,000x return on your investment.
oh yeah.
So that's and I'm sure you see your book the same way, right? Somebody that pays a nominal amount of money, and then they use it to move up in their career, go from let's say, I mean, I hate the term junior, but let's say you go from a regular software or data engineer to like a senior data engineer,
Mhm.
or et cetera, right? So you use it to improve in your career.
Yeah, I mean, I think people underestimate the power of investing in books and courses and even a lot of free stuff on YouTube. It's
Yeah,
like you can get a lot of
there's
great
so much.
education without even having to go to college, for example. I think,
Exactly.
especially in this field where it changes a lot, and I think
Right.
there's a lot of utility to continuously learning. But it's cool you wrote a book that I think took a different angle because you're right. There's like a bajillion sequel books out there, and who knows how many
Yeah.
more are going to be there with ChatGPT. But
Exactly. Exactly.
yeah, so it's probably smart to focus more kind of up market a bit. That's how long did it take you to write your book?
The book itself took maybe like 3 months, but the core writing was done in I want to say 2, 3 weeks. I rewrote it maybe 3 times, and I got stuck on the final chapter until someone told me, you know what, just release the book.
Yeah,
So after 3 months, I started, I think, in January, and by April, I launched it like early April of 22. And it sold like 200 copies the first week.
it's
I
awesome.
was amazed that, and people were sending me all this message, and the book wasn't even fully polished. I mean, I just released a new version of the book a couple of weeks ago, version 1.5, which reorganized things a little bit and then added a chapter on DBT, because DBT has become like the de facto transformation tool,
Oh yeah, it's
and
everywhere.
this for DBT core, not necessarily the DBT cloud. And so people love it. I mean, I get the occasional, as anybody who's posted stuff online, I get the occasional oh, this book was terrible or whatever, but I
It
don't let that
happens.
sway me, because I know it has made an impact on people's lives.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where you should just expect like 5 to 10% of people out there are just going to hate not just your book, but
Yeah,
probably you personally for whatever reason. That's just the reality of it. So, I mean, I see the
that's
same
just
thing on
what it
my book. Like, there's overwhelmingly great reviews, but then some people will write like, "Oh, blah blah blah," just a bunch of words. Like, literally, I think that was one of them. And then,
is.
but you just learn to take it in stride. It's like, everyone's got an opinion, and I think their opinions are dumb, but that's how it is. So,
Yeah,
uh,
I
it's
look on the positive side. I'm like, okay, it's helping people. It's not utter garbage.
not just it. If you're getting emails, even if it's one where somebody was like that, that book really helped
Yes,
me in my career. Then I mean, that's enough validation that you need.
exactly.
So yeah.
Exactly. I'm like, if I'm helping one person, I've done my job, right?
Mhm. That's all
Um,
it's about, man. Then you write a lot on Substack too. I subscribe to your newsletter. get the constant
Yeah,
Ergest emails bombarding my inbox.
yeah.
That's super cool.
It has the most boring name you could think of. It's called data patterns, and the URL is sqlpatterns.com because somebody owns datapatterns.com, and they
Mm,
registered it in 1999, and they've renewed it ever since. And I have no desire to find out how much it's going to cost me to try and acquire the domain. So I'll stick with sqlpatterns.com. But I started the blog in or the Substack initially to talk about sort of the careers aspect of data. In fact, the first few messages were about careers, and it for me it always comes back to career. But then I've tried various facets of analytics. So I've tried to talk about, what are the problems that people face in the data space. And I've been in this space for many years. I've seen a lot of these problems firsthand, and I was trying to kind of analyze them with a new perspective. I was using a bunch of different tools from theory of constraints, and I was using different frameworks to try and actually figure out what is the root cause of all these problems. And I
mm,
still don't think I've done a pretty good, I still don't think I've done a good job at figuring that out, but I've done a decent enough job that people like getting my messages. In fact, I've had a few people, Substack has this feature where you can pledge a certain amount, like $8 a
mm.
month or whatever, and I've had maybe 10 people pledge that they're willing to pay for the stuff that I write. I
Super
write it
cool.
every other week, right? So that I don't get stressed for pushing stuff out every week. But I'm still kind of exploring the space. I've looked into the analytics space. I've looked into the careers aspect. I've looked, I'm tinkering with some more specific like engineering content. Uh, but yeah, and you are one of my top recommenders. Like your Substack, when I see who has recommended the most, it's from
Oh, interesting. I didn't even know that. That's cool.
from you.
Well, happy to
So
help.
I certainly appreciate that. But it's kind of it's interesting to have this sort of like megaphone, right? That I don't it's scary to write an email to five, even 100 people.
Mhm.
Think about my Substack has now grown to 6,000 people, and I don't see it as scary anymore. I just see it as like, I'm letting an idea out into the world, and I hope that it is going to be useful, and people sort of pay with their attention, with their likes, with where they share the information. So when I see that, that's enough of a feedback loop for me. Like I don't necessarily track the metrics, even though I am a data person. I don't use data personally as much as I probably should have, but it's been a fun little experiment that has grown into something much more interesting. And now I'm trying to figure out what else, like how can I make it even more useful for people. I'm tinkering with a few ideas, such as maybe creating like a library of engineering concepts that people can learn and they can use either for interview prep or to improve their careers. I'm still tinkering with a few ideas. And in fact, I did have a question for you with your experiences with your second Substack. Like I believe you have a second Substack
Yeah, I have
that is
two
pertains
actually.
to your book, which is a paid Substack, so people can get chapters ahead of time. And I was thinking maybe if maybe I write a new book and I sort of release it chapter by chapter to a paid group of subscribers. So that's one of the ideas that I'm tinkering
I
with.
think the model's been good. It's definitely a work in progress, and but I think it's there's a lot of people who have paid to subscribe to practical data modeling, and
Yeah.
that's the working title. It may not be the actual one, but I think after working on my first book with a big publisher, I felt like there were I don't regret it. I think it was a good move for the book at that time. But I also felt like the publishing model is fundamentally broken. Like I think
Mm.
by most accounts were, that book's one of the O'Reilly's more successful titles. But it's
Mhm.
like I just felt like, the authors do all the work and the publisher takes all the money, right? Because it's not just writing, but they also, yes, as the author, you're also marketing the book and promoting it. The
Exactly.
publisher doesn't do shit
With
for
the
that.
audience.
So I'm just like,
Yeah.
why am I giving you like all this money and you aren't helping at all on this? I think that really rubbed me wrong. So I thought
Mm.
about some different models and ultimately decided, let's, do the self-publishing route. I actually have a new imprint where I get to be the publisher now, but I'm offering much better deals for authors and I think much better support than the traditional publishers
Oh,
are. I'm not ready to announce the company yet, but it's when
yeah.
the book's out, you'll know. But that's in the works. And Substack, I felt like it was an interesting experiment where why not try and be public with the book and build a community around the idea? That's the more important thing is building the audience ahead of time. I can't tell you like is that so I run I look at the sort of the opposite argument. Would a reputable publisher help you sell books, right?
Right.
Is that the determining factor? And I can say unequivocally, it doesn't. Um, there's a lot of books that are out on my old publisher,
Mm.
but they don't have a single review on Amazon,
Yeah.
not a one. And I'm like, so that
Yeah.
that proves to
What
me
is
that okay,
what are they doing at the end of the day, right? Your book is most likely not even making it on a shelf in a bookstore somewhere. Plus, bookstores are sort of disappearing. There was one I used to go to here in Boston,
it's
and
tragic.
they left, and I I don't have any bookstores within either walkable distance or even by taking public transport. I mean,
Yeah,
they're thinning out. So more and more of the model is moving online.
oh,
And
completely.
with these like
Amazon's like 80,
on
90% of book sales. So it's like,
yeah, exactly.
you go fish where the fish are. That's a general rule. I mean, you could be a hipster and try and do only boutique bookshops. That's one
Yeah.
way to do it. But I feel like the other way is experimenting with the nature of what is a book, especially in the age of ChatGPT, right? And so I feel like
Mhm.
this is you're
Mhm.
providing, it's not just about publishing a book anymore to me. It's about providing an experience for a community and for an audience that goes above and beyond a book. So it's about having, regular, meetups online and maybe in person, and obviously giving access to special material. Which now that I'm almost done with my Coursera class, I'll be much more equipped to spend more time on the book. I do apologize to the audience, but of course has to get done.
Yeah.
But that's how I view Substack. I felt like, and I'm actually really happy with the success so far because it's like
Mhm.
when the book's out, you've already got the audience and
Right.
and people talking about it. And it gives you a chance to validate your ideas because the traditional book writing process is as you described, it's like you write this whole thing and then you throw it out in the public and maybe people like it and maybe they
Right.
don't. I don't
Right.
know. And that
Yeah.
to me, that's like you don't have to do that. And so, and the other thing, and
Yeah.
just before I close out, because I know it's your interview, not mine. But like, in practical data modeling, the chapters are going to have video as well, right? So what you do with
Mm.
YouTube, where there's
Yeah.
I feel like this is sort of the missing thing where if you're constrained to paper and writing a book, it's going to be printed, you don't want to have a lot of um, technical examples that might go stale, right? And so that's
Yeah.
sort of the balance. Well, SQL, it's a bit easier because it's like
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
been around
Yeah.
forever, but like,
Well,
yeah, so that's my
yeah.
thoughts on Substack.
Well, that's the again the reason I'm asking is it is my interview, like you said, at the end of the day, and I'm interested in some of these things because I'm looking to try similar things, right?
Yep.
And I went the self-publishing route because I didn't think anybody would publish an 80 to 100 page book on just SQL patterns. They probably would have asked me to pad more chapters and put me on a writing schedule and all these other things. So I'm like, no, I can see people are self-publishing. I can keep it as an electronic book. And it would work.
Oh yeah, like the guys
Uh,
at Byte Go, for example. I mean, I don't know them personally, but I
yeah,
can see their success, and it's like, and that to me that's an
exactly.
indie label, and they're killing it. And it's like I don't think you
Yeah,
need the big
that's
publishers anymore.
that's the model I'm aiming to copy. Um, and I kind of wanted to swing the conversation back to something we were talking about before we started recording, which is how did this all start for me? I started my
Mhm.
Substack writing about careers. There was a point in
Yeah.
my career after I'd been at the first company for a decade or so, where all I knew was SQL Server and SQL. And I kind of looked in the marketplace and I couldn't find anything. Maybe I wasn't looking hard enough, but I couldn't find anything for, so I was thinking to myself, what do I do next? How do I, like, what's next for this type of career? Is it like business intelligence? Is it something else? Then I was able to get a job using SQL as sort of the foundation. And again, after a few years there, I was faced with the same question. Like data engineers at that company were working with Hadoop, they were writing shell scripts, they were writing all these different, and they were basically on a pager, right? They had a pager rotation that if a job went wrong, there would be paged. They would have to wake up in the middle of the night, open up their laptop, and figure out why a pipeline had failed. And I'm sure this is a common experience with a lot of data engineers. And so I looked at that as like okay, if I become a data engineer, this is what I have to deal with. And I sort of like, maybe that's not what I want to do. And so the underlying, the fundamental question that I've always had in the back of my mind is, how do I have a long lasting career?
Mhm.
A long-lasting, resilient career? Like, how do I learn things that keep compounding on themselves as opposed to things that become obsolete in 2 years, 3 years, 5
Yeah.
years? You look at the typical software engineer, and they learn one framework today, let's say like a web framework, Node.js, whatever. Tomorrow there's something else, Vue.js. The next day it's React. And so these guys are always on the edge of having to learn new things all the time. Now, I didn't want that for myself. I mean, who wants to have their knowledge? You spend 2 3 years learning something really really technical, and all of a sudden nobody wants that thing anymore because they want the new shiny thing. And so the underlying question is like, how do I learn stuff that doesn't actually change? Like, how do I learn things that compound and first of all allow me to always be in demand as a professional, right? And I'm able to get a new job quickly if I were to switch careers, or something were to happen, which has happened.
Mhm.
um, and and also like remain relevant. You want to remain relevant. I mean, I love what I do. I love working with data. I love working with SQL. Now I'm actually learning Python, which is kind of a strange thing to say for someone who's been in this space for so many years and not knowing any Python. But um, the opportunity has always been there for me. So I'm like, okay, so there is something here. There are some patterns. There are some things that don't change. And when I was looking at, for let's take like Ralph Kimball's famous book on data modeling, which the first edition was written in 1999. That book, or the knowledge in that book, is still relevant on this day. If you ask any data engineer what kind of modeling to do for the data warehouse, it's dimensional modeling. Now, of
Mhm.
course, if you go to Europe, they will tell you it's data vault, and there's like a thing going on between those two, which I really don't want to get into that. I have no dogs in that race. I don't care. Basically, I subscribe to your theory there, which is do whatever works. If it works, do it. If it doesn't work, don't do it.
Yeah.
Right. So so like that knowledge is still relevant. It was written in 1999. It's still relevant today. Or something like ETL, extract, transform, and load. There's another book by Ralph Campbell, not as well known. It's called the
Mm,
ETL toolkit. And I opened it up. I look at it. It was published in early 2000s. And he talks about the same things that we see today. He's talking about real-time ETL. He's talking about batching. He's talking about different ways of extracting data from a database so that you don't overload it. Ways of like transforming data, ways of moving data across multiple places, and how to land it and store it in efficient ways. These questions are relevant to this day, and they were relevant 30 years ago. And so when I see something like that, I say, okay, these are things that don't change. And if I focus on learning these things that don't change, as opposed to, let's say, learning Kafka, or let's say learning Hadoop, or any of these new technologies, um, then I can ensure that whatever role becomes, if I have an opportunity to switch roles, or if I need to get another job, I can look at their offering and sort of say, hey, I know maybe I don't know the specifics of the platform that you're using. Let's say I've worked with Snowflake and BigQuery, but you use, I don't know, Redshift or Databricks. At the end of the day, the stuff that you would do is pretty much the same. Yes, there's some specifics to the platform itself, but like these platforms all support SQL. They all have some kind of storage. They all support loading data as, let's say, like an S3 bucket, and then scanning the data into a table, writing a query on top of that table. Some of them support dbt, so you can now build a multi-step transformation data workflow, and so on and so forth. So I look at the data and at my data career from that perspective, the perspective of like, what are the things in there that I can, no matter what new technology becomes relevant in the next few years, I'm still relevant.
yeah. No, it's a good approach. By the way, I think Kimball's book first came out in 96. Um,
Wow.
yeah, but even not that it matters, it's old as hell, no matter how you look at it. But
And the ideas like the like OLTP versus OLAP, that was probably in the 80s.
yeah, I mean those discussions were happening. I know that at least the biggest manifestation of that was a data warehouse, right? Which,
Yeah.
as Bill was telling me, was like when that idea was introduced, it was almost heretical. Like people, it got a very mixed reaction actually. Because along with that, he came up with the idea for ETL as well. Um,
Mhm.
but it was like, or helped spearhead that. But it was like both of these ideas at the time were very controversial, which is
Mm,
kind of interesting now because
interesting.
you take it for granted. But like,
Yes.
um, there are a lot of circumstances where, like, if you kind of look back in history, the data warehouse and ETL almost didn't happen, at least the way it did.
Hmm.
I think like Bill was telling me one of his old employers didn't want to pursue ETL or data warehousing as a line of business, and so he's like, "Screw it, I'll just go and do it on my own." Then, that's where he started his,
They believe in the idea for
because they were doing implementations of it, but they didn't want to like. I think they were doing like, yeah, massive amounts of implementations of data warehousing, but then I guess they weren't taking it that seriously as spinning it off into like a real big line of business or something like that. Yeah, I'll have to ask him. But it was an interesting story where you connect the dots, like a lot of the stuff that we talk about now that we take for granted, like data warehousing and
yeah.
ETL, and then later, Kimball comes up with his own take on more of a data modeling approach or data mart
Right,
approach to
right.
warehousing. But it's like some of the stuff wouldn't have happened, or at least it would have happened, but just probably in a different way. But yeah, the idea of like separating OLTP and OLAP was actually controversial for quite a few
That
reasons.
is
Yeah, it's
that is
interesting.
that is very interesting. And the reason I say that is when I was when I was working at my first company, we had a single instance SQL server. And within that instance, there were two databases. One was the production database, the other was the reports database. And so the reports, we had to So what is your alternative? Let's say if you don't have a data warehouse, you have to query your production database
Yep.
because you want to know select count star from orders. You want to know how much have you sold over the past day, week, month, etc. And so running those queries in the production system may work initially, but if your company grows, eventually you have to move that somewhere else so that you don't disturb the live database, right?
Right.
And so that's how that journey begins. And like you said, it may have become something else, but the pattern of separating the two systems would have eventually come up. Even I knew nothing about OLTP versus OLAP, and I needed to like separate the concerns because
Yep.
one database you couldn't run queries directly on I mean they were on the same server, so that was a whole thing, which we later fixed with replication, right? Replication is then the next step. You replicate the live database. Now you can query this other database, uh, but they discovered that with the old databases, running these queries, this aggregate queries, was very slow because the database was not designed for something like that. And so
Hmm.
that's where the need for a different way of like modeling data sort of uh, came in. But it's interesting to know that it was controversial even at that time, something that we take sort of for granted. I may have if data warehouses were not a thing, I probably would have become a DBA, like a
Yeah.
database admin.
Yeah, Bill told me he has letters still that because I think he wrote an article about the data warehouse in Computer World or something like that. I need to go back and ask him,
Wow.
but he has letters that he still has them in his office. It's funny, but just saying like, this guy, yeah, just, I mean, just the foulest stuff you could think of, people would write to him, or about him. And it was, but here we are. I
Wow.
mean, the idea won out, and, and that's what we call it. It's
Yeah.
the warehouse. And what you're describing earlier, I think what is the term? The Lindy effect, I think it is
The
for
Lindy effect.
things have been around. The longer some things have been around, especially in technology, the longer they'll probably be around. Like SQL is a really good example
Yes.
where, yeah, I mean there's a lot of attempts to displace it. I don't think
Mhm,
that's going
mhm.
to happen. So,
They all come back. You look at, for example, I learned that Databricks, when they first launched, they did not have a SQL interface.
oh no,
Hadoop did not have a
Spark didn't
SQL.
have data. Dude, Spark didn't have SQL for years. Like it was
Yeah,
RDBs,
Spark
and
also.
it was,
You
yeah, it
had to
was.
write Python, right? Or you had to
You
write
had to write
Mattermost jobs.
Scala. Like you could write Python,
Or
but it was like
Scala.
super limited back then. It sucked actually. So you'd
Yeah.
so people were learning Scala for a bit, but then I think people realized like that sucks. So I don't know. No offense if you like Scala, but I don't. So,
Well, eventually, when you get down to the people that are going to use it every day, the data analysts, the data scientists, you're not going to expect them to learn this language just to query. You're not going to expect them to write MapReduce jobs. You're not going to expect them to write Scala just to query data. And so they had to, by necessity, build a SQL interface. And I think a lot of these tools initially begin as like NoSQL or New SQL, however they're branded these days. And eventually SQL kind of swallows that up. Like if you look at like these document databases that store JSON, like Mongo
Mongo.
or if, now Postgres, you can store JSON in the table. So eventually SQL expands to kind of um, envelop in it everything that has sort of succeeded. For example, JSON, there was a time where it was JSON versus XML. I don't know if you remember,
Oh, I remember
right?
that.
It was
Yeah.
like, right, it was either a REST API or SOAP, I think was
Mhm.
the other one.
Yep.
And for a while, both of them were supported. Eventually, JSON won out. And now that JSON won out, SQL decided, hey, why don't we just put JSON in the table? It makes a lot of sense. And then you write a couple of functions to extract the JSON objects, and voila, now you can have a document database with Postgres, which has decades and decades of development and documentation and questions and answers, knowledge base, people that understand it. Um, so yeah, there's like it's interesting to see the evolution of technology and how certain things begin as something new, and then you'll see whether or not they survive based on how they face with reality.
Oh yeah.
Like certain things disappear, and certain things end up surviving and becoming the de facto
Yeah, like
thing.
I don't know if you checked out Michael Stonebreaker. So he had like a paper back, I think in the early
Yes.
2000s about what goes around comes around. Then
Yes.
him and another co-author rewrote it, I think this summer. What goes around comes
And
around and
the
around. Yeah, but the interesting thing was, so he was early on. I think he worked on Ingress way back in the day, which became
yes.
Postgres, and
Yeah.
yeah, he's an OG in the database field and SQL. But it's interesting because that paper goes through definitely a bit more of a revision where you're talking. Yeah, you mentioned like things like document databases, and the whole premise of his paper
Yeah.
is that the relational data model and relational databases, I should say, and SQL are sort of what everything sort of converges to at some point
Yeah.
for a lot of reasons.
Continue.
So it
They
was interesting.
continue to be useful. They continue. I mean, there was this article that I read about the marketing of MongoDB that I
Oh
linked
yeah.
on my right on one of my latest posts, and it's like a three-part series that reads like a fascinating story on a technology that was actually actively marketed by the vendor, and people actually did use it, and they ran into problems that the technology was so new, it had not yet evolved to the point where it was solving those problems.
Yep.
And there was an existing technology, which was Postgres or MySQL, that had already solved these problems, like problems of scale, problems like of ACID, being able to like ensure that your data is ACID compliant, especially with financial transactions. You need to make sure that that stuff is stored there and it's solid, right? Um, so a lot of these companies ended up undoing their Mongo implementations and going back to more traditional RDBMS.
Mhm.
And it was like a massive, painful project to try something new, move everything to the new thing, and then move back to the old thing. And I faced that in my career when the developers. So it's the benefit of something like a Mongo or like a document database for a developer is that they don't have to specify the schema, right? It's called
Mhm.
schema-less or schema on read as opposed to schema on write, and that gives them flexibility. So if they need to mutate that particular class or object to add more columns or features, they can do that without worrying about the underlying storage. So because JSON is very flexible. But here I was the data engineer, data analyst, and I'm trying to extract data from Mongo. And they do provide like a JDBC
Mhm.
interface. But when they told me that the schema is not fixed and it could change. But wait a minute, how can I write any queries on top of this thing that is constantly changing? I'm building an ETL pipeline and I'm mapping every single column to the data that I'm storing and then that I'm reporting on. And now you're telling me tomorrow you may all of a sudden decide to delete a column or change the name of a column or add a new column or change the granularity of the data.
Mhm.
And of course, as a data engineer, this is not a new problem. This is something that data engineers deal with day in and day out, where upstream data changes and you're sort of left having to fix this failing pipeline. It's like a nightmare scenario. But yeah, when I was dealing with that, it blew my mind that they didn't have a fixed schema. Nowadays known as like a data contract that says I'm willing to give you this specific API, this specific schema, this kind of data granularity, these field types, et cetera, et cetera. And if they need to change something, they need to update the contract. So I need to know before anything changes. So the data contract acts as like a check between engineers, software engineers, and data engineers. And that ensures data quality downstream, right? But not a lot of companies have this in place. So a lot of companies just pull data directly from the production database. And of course, if something changes, well, you're left having to fix the mess that got created. But yeah, that's fun times with data engineering.
Yeah, Mongo's an interesting one. I remember when it was being heavily marketed and it was interesting because like I think in the early 2010s it was the mean stack. So
Mm,
Mongo, Express, Angular, and Node was the popular development stack.
yes,
And you'd use something like Mongo because it is, it's, well, they call it BSON, it's binary JSON, but it's really just
yes,
it's JSON descriptive. But that's sort of the language of the web, as you mentioned earlier. And
yeah,
so, JavaScript is like literally, JavaScript objects are
exactly.
JSON as well. And um, I mean, literally stands for JavaScript Object Notation is what it stands for. So the
Yeah,
temptation is definitely there, and I've used it in production before, and I think it's good for getting things started. They have introduced new things like, or no, I would say newer things from when I was using it. It was like 12 years ago or something. They have like schema validation now, so at least you can't like completely screw yourself
yes.
over. But it's still one of those things where I think I've seen good schemas in Mongo, and I've seen some nightmares. One client we had was they had like for key value pairs, I think their keys were dates,
Oh,
which
yes.
would, if you thought about it for a second, that kind of makes sense, except it's also like a horrible anti-pattern when you think about it a bit deeper, because they want to be able to look up by day what is happening, but it's like, so that shot them in the foot a bit. But yeah, because they were trying to get data for analytics, and like this is like kind of a nightmare to deal with.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, there's a lot of tools out there. I mean, uh, my impression is that data engineers are going to need to be a lot more, I think, focused on streaming. I think streaming is just going to get a lot easier to do. So it's like,
Mhm.
that's the one where I feel like that's sort of the next shoe to drop. But that's
Yeah, and to add a little bit to this and sort of tie back to your conversation that you had, uh, I forget with who, but it was about data ops
oh, Chris Berg.
with Chris Berg. Yeah. So when he said, "Hey, like data engineers are too quiet, man. Like they need to speak up and kind of like bring just sort of say, hey, wait a minute, you can't just be changing this stuff on me and or do whatever you feel like. You know,
Yeah,
I'm I, I'm doing a very important part of the job, which is you are emitting signals from the application and you're storing that stuff in the database as events or whatever software engineers decide to do. And now I need to bring this data in somewhere else so we can report on it, right? So, but these days, data engineers are just sort of like stuck in between the data producers and the data consumers, and they just sort of like deal with it in a quiet, suffering way. So I really like what Chris said, which is that you need to be more verbal about this stuff, meaning you
yeah,
gotta expect some kind of a data contract. So, one of the companies that I worked with, they actually had this in place and that had it for many years with a homegrown data warehouse where every application that they had like a web service that would provide a very specific stream of data in a very specific format that was highly checked and controlled. It was in a GitHub repository and all of that. And if the data didn't fit that frame, it would basically throw the error onto the software engineering side as opposed to on the data warehouse side. And they sort of had like this mesh architecture way before mesh became a
that's cool.
thing. But like every data producer had their own web API endpoint that sent data to the data warehouse, which then ingested it and was able to report on things. So but this was sort of designed from the top down, as opposed to like a lot of the effort is sort of like, let's get analysts and engineers excited about this new thing, and then they should sort of push it up to that. I mean, maybe it works in some places. I don't think I've seen it work uh, in a lot of situations. It Whereas if, let's say, the CEO is demanding high quality metrics, and then he puts the CTO in charge of saying, okay, I need quality, I need these metrics to be highly accurate. And so the CTO has no, let's say, choice but to implement something like data contracts, right? We are not talking about the politics side of data, which
Hmm.
doesn't get talked about much. But it is, I sort of see top down as the way to work. I don't know what your experience has been, but I've had one person say, no, it can work sort of the other way. But at least that's what I've seen. It has to
Are
come
you
from
saying
the
like
top.
top-down mandates from
Top down mandates.
decision makers to or
Yes.
yeah, I mean that's common. It depends on the company. I've also seen it work the other way where devs, for example, might have a lot of liberty to express their opinions. I think choose their direction. I think the best places are like I'm going to tell you what you need to do and or what needs to be done, and I'm going to let you figure out how to do it. And that's
Yes.
but that's still a
That's
top-down mandate to some extent. But I'm not telling you
right.
exactly the implementation details. I hired you to figure
Exactly.
that out. Yeah, it's an
I'm
interesting one.
you know I'm the CEO. I'm saying I need quality. I need high quality metrics. You're the CTO. You figure it out. As a CTO, in order for you to have quality metrics, the data that you produce from your application needs to fit a specific schema, and it needs to have, all its validations in place. So that sort of becomes. But I'm not telling you, here's, me as the CEO telling you, the CTO, go in and implement data contracts. I'm just saying I need, quality, high quality metrics. And so you
Mhm.
go and you implement it however you know best. And then the CTO can then mandate that, let's say that they say, okay, everything in our application space is event-driven architecture. That's a common pattern that you see these days. And that sort of becomes the de facto way that things are done. But yeah, it's the mandate is, I want quality metrics. The mandate isn't do this one specific thing. But I
Yeah, in this specific way,
it's
like I
so,
need you to do it, and
yeah,
you know, like
right.
yeah, CEOs are gonna tell you like, yeah, I need you, and I need you to use this certain code formatting style. I mean, maybe they will. I don't know. That would be very odd. Kind of cool if they actually said that, but they probably won't. Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's interesting. Because I mean, Chris Berg also brought up in the podcast the notion of process really, and why most of the time, if something is not working in your company, you should look at the process and not the people. The people are, operating within an environment where there's a broken process or a lack of process, which happens a ton too, and they just kind of make it up as they go along. But
Yeah,
that's I think a very underrated thing where most people, and I'm guilty of this too, where you just
yeah,
obviously think everyone's an idiot, which in some cases, in some places, that's absolutely true. I'm not going to deny that there are a large number of them, just because of that's how bell curves work. You have literally the other
exactly,
side of the
exactly,
curve. They're idiots.
absolutely.
That's how it is. So that's you apply that to a large population. Yeah, that's a lot of people. But on the other half of the bell curve, it's there's sanity and
Yeah,
non-idiotic behavior. So you always got to look on the bright side of life. But the
yeah,
processes are one of those things where it's like if people are operating within uh, a setup that's going to help them succeed and they can do their best work, then that's awesome. But oftentimes that also needs to be looked at too. So
yeah. And even take a very specific process like a sales process, and you're expecting your account executives or your biz dev executives to input data into the CRM in a very specific way. And often this is not enforced. So sometimes, they open a lead or an opportunity, they work on it, they accidentally close it, they open it again because they didn't mean to close it. And now you, as a data engineer, you're seeing in the system close date, and then you see some other status that, like, you expect the close date to be final, but it's not.
Mhm.
Why? Because somebody did not put like a some kind of a process in place to say, hey, like, you can't, like, are you sure you want to close this? If you close it, you can't reopen it anymore. You have to open up a new opportunity. I mean, that sort of
Yeah.
causes its own problems downstream. But yeah, this is kind of what I mean when I say that you have to have a stable process in order to have, quality data. Like, even if you implement data contracts, if the process that's generating the data
Mhm.
is still in flux, they're still figuring it out, you are going to get junk data. You're going to get
Oh yeah.
opportunities that got closed first, and then they got won, or the other way around. Like, you don't see this, like, smooth flow of an opportunity through the stages. Let's say we're taking a sales specifically, and I've seen this firsthand in a company where they were the product managers were constantly tinkering with the process and with the product in order to see what would work best. And because they wanted to implement things quickly, because they wanted to run a quick experiment, right, the engineers would just go in and make a quick change. And today, this field in the database was not meant to be updated. Tomorrow, this field is now getting updated, and you lose the previous date. You lose basically information because somebody ran an update statement. And now you, as the data engineer, have to create a history table and take a daily
Yeah.
snapshot just so you can rebuild things the way that they looked before, right? So you can do accurate reporting. But yeah, people don't think about that stuff when they're quickly uh, iterating quickly, moving fast and breaking things, all these,
Mhm.
like, software engineering paradigms, they don't naturally lead to the stable processes, high quality data, and so on and so forth.
Mhm. Oh yeah, I mean, think of the SQL queries you'd have to write where your where clause has all these very strange conditions, or your case statement, whatever you're doing, but it's like you're filtering
Yes,
out just like because at one point in time the data was this, but then after this date it was kind of like here, and then it just gets
exactly.
like funky. It's so I mean, yeah, you're absolutely right. I think it's um like observing. I think if you're modeling data, if you're working with it, even software engineers, like understand the process, but also understand that the world is likely to change, and
Yeah,
your data model needs to account for that and update
exactly.
accordingly. I think because the thing with data modelers, I think the cool ones or the effective ones are definitely aware of changes, but the ones I've seen where it goes wrong is when you sort of you want to contain the world in your data model,
Mhm.
and the
Too
world
strict.
just isn't like that. I mean, maybe it was in the 80s and the 90s where,
Yes.
but I mean, if you were to think that you could account for every single possibility in your model, or that your model reflects the business process from here to kingdom come, I think you're a bit not living in
Yeah,
reality.
and I've actually seen that working with a technical person, like in my current role, where we do spend a fair bit of time doing paying down tech debt. We
Mm,
know when we introduce tech debt into our data workflow, and we have specific tickets, we add cycles to each sprint to basically pay down tech debt, either in small installments or all at once. But we know that we're doing it on purpose, right? Whereas a lot of these startups and other companies, they just like to move quickly. They move quickly. They say, okay, let's just, until they find, let's say, product market fit, by which time they can sort of stabilize their
mhm.
processes, stabilize their sales and marketing
Yeah.
and operations and all that. So
Which I think if you're at a startup, that's what you need to do. I mean, it is about
yeah,
like getting customers, getting paid, and like, if you have to leave a massive amount of carnage to get there, I guess it's how it is. I mean, I would do that. I mean, I'm not going to sit there and try and come up with the
I
perfect data model for my startup, right?
do
There's
yes.
so many unknowns in that picture. And that's one thing I'm writing about, and the book is really that's where it depends argument comes in because your context is probably different. If you're a startup, it's like your
Mhm.
goal is not to achieve perfection or even have standardization of processes yet. Your goal is to get paying customers in a repeatable fashion. Like that's,
Yep.
you know, and to make
Yeah,
money, like, and to prove something out. Like that's literally the only task of a startup is to create a customer.
exactly,
So,
exactly.
you
And to
know,
have enough visibility in that process to see it, is it working? Is it not working? If it is working, how can we accelerate? If it's not working, what's broken?
yeah,
And what do you have to go fix? So you need to have enough data to be able to answer those basic questions. So even when I look at it from the metrics perspective, uh, I worked with obviously by Silam, who created this like massive document, which is on a GitHub repo called Soma, and he has Soma metrics, Soma, which is the standard operating metrics for analytics, and just for a SaaS business, he has like 450 metrics that encapsulates the entire business. But if you're a startup, you probably don't need 450 metrics to encapsulate everything. Maybe you need to track your revenue, your recurring revenue, things like that. Maybe you only have two or three applications that you need to sort of, you have a CRM, you have like a record of like paying, like a Stripe, let's say, and then you have your product. So you have like three data sets that you need to put together in one data model. You could build that with an OBT, like a one big table, right? And it can work for as long as the company is still small and still trying things out.
mhm.
Uh, but I have seen OBTs become really, really cumbersome and take 7 or 8 hours to process.
Like one bloated
At that
table.
point,
Yeah.
one big table, right?
Oh, I said one bloated
Uh,
table because that's what it becomes
oh,
usually
one
with startup.
well, they work to start with, but then the moment that I broke it up into a dimensional model, all of a sudden it went from 7 hours down to 1 hour.
Yeah, that's how it. But that's it. I mean, if you're at a small startup, I don't recommend that you do a dimensional model.
Mm,
I mean, your time needs to be spent like you're saying. One big table is probably fine. Maybe like just like whatever I call a query driven model. You just SQL scripts. I'll just
yeah.
query things. But like, you just need to figure out, okay, like, are we default alive at this point as a company? Like, I remember at startups I was at, and some were wildly successful, some weren't. But it's like in any case, the number of things we always track is, okay, so how many customers do we have today versus
Right.
yesterday, right? Are we
It's
achieving
important.
that in a way that's sustainable, or is the customer acquisition costs higher than what we're going to be making of these customers, right? Like you need to understand your customer,
Exactly.
and any metrics related to that is like well, all you need to care about. Anything else is bullshit, in my opinion. Like it doesn't matter.
Yeah. It's too early for you to worry about any of that other stuff. Way
It's
too
way too
early.
early. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, the timing of these things is definitely so. This comes into another point, which is the ability to evolve a model. And a
Yeah.
thing like a dimensional model is relatively easy to evolve, right?
Mhm.
It's not that strict. I've worked with, I mostly have done OBTs, but I have seen them taken to the extreme where I just said it took 7 hours to
That's
process,
insane.
but it's easy to evolve a simple dimensional model, right?
Oh,
It's
yeah.
yeah, like add a column or like add another fact table or
Yep.
whatever. It's yeah, and then once things get to a point where okay, this thing is like taking too long, maybe you go and you rethink the model and you evolve it to the next
Yep.
phase. So you don't want to be too strict about it.
No, no, and then Data Vault allows for a lot of flexibility too if you want to go that route. And
You want to go that route.
there's
Yeah.
a lot of routes you can go, and that's just it. But just know your options, I think is like the main thing. If you know the different ways you can model data, then and different ways to use it. And this applies to software engineers as well. I mean, I
Yeah,
think if people are using relational databases, but that doesn't mean they're using the relational model.
exactly.
Or these
Yeah,
things
you
are,
don't have to have a
and
third,
that's
third or fourth or fifth normal form
yeah,
in data.
yeah. But it's just yeah, because I mean, how many applications have you seen where the data model it's not their normal form.
No,
It's probably
yeah,
one and a half. I just made that up, but it's like
yeah.
it's not there.
If that.
Cool,
Um,
man. Yeah, we're coming up on time. It's good chatting with you. Maybe I have to have you back on. I don't think we got nearly to any of the questions we wanted to answer, so that's cool. Um, yeah.
Yeah,
So,
the only question that I had that I sort of started this with is you've now began this journey outside the traditional 9 to 5 with the book, with consulting, with your speaking. And I'm n- not saying that I'm going in that direction, but it is something that has always appealed to me, even as a hedge against like the economic times,
oh
right?
yeah,
Like
yeah.
I happen to lose my job and I'm in between jobs and I don't have any source of income because it is the number one source of income. And so I'm curious as to what your experience has been with consulting. I know you recently wrote on LinkedIn that you're scaling that down a little bit to focus more on creating content and how that has been with your speaking and with the book and sort of like other sources of income is
The
what
main
I'm.
thing I think to take away from this is diversification is good, right? So if you're doing just consulting, for example, I think that's great. I would definitely, for people who are interested in that, just know like pipeline is key. So always be finding ways to build your pipeline. Don't take your foot off the gas, at any point in time, because it takes a long time to build a pipeline and it's really easy to make it disappear. Pipeline's key,
Mhm.
but I would say the biggest thing is like, you're doing a good job of this, but the biggest obstacle most people have is like, most people will they're obscure. Nobody knows about you, right? And I think that that's a thing that if you're fine with that, great. But when you need to look for a job, for example, right? Or you need to find a new opportunity, or say you're out building a pipeline for your consulting practice or finding an audience for your content, like, you need to break out of that bubble of obscurity that holds you, that just basically hides you in a lot of ways. And I think that's the biggest enemy for a lot of people is just nobody knows who they are and nobody cares, to be perfectly blunt. So, LinkedIn's a really good spot to build that network. I would say to replicate what happened to me would be impossible. Like, I don't think I'm not even going to try and like give anybody a rubric, like, here's how you could do what I did. Because I think that there was a lot of timing and probably a lot of good fortune involved in that. Like, I don't think you can
Mhm.
replicate, like, the fundamentals of data engineering blew up in ways that I don't think we anticipated. And like that was
Yeah.
part of, we wanted to write a really good book, but the market ultimately determines that. And so,
Mhm.
so luck was a big part of it, but that changed everything for, I'm actually writing about this right now for my newsletter. It'll be out this weekend, but it's like, the notion of one to one versus one to many. And I think if you're in a position where you can impact, many people, you should do that, right? Consulting is like inherently a
Mhm.
one to one engagement, and that's certainly
Yeah.
impactful for the customer. It might be impactful for your pocketbook, but ultimately, if you can help more people, then I think you should find ways to do that. So, I've
Yeah.
managed to be in the good spot where I can make a very good living off of speaking and
Mhm.
royalties from various things, and consulting if I want, which, I'm not ruling it out, but
Yeah.
it would cost a lot of money to, because the one thing you start realizing is
It,
the only thing you can control is your time. And like,
yes.
once you realize that, to me, the true measure of wealth is not how much money you have, but like, how much control do you have over your schedule?
Yeah. And you're not the first to say that. Even billionaires say that.
It's
It's
true.
it's exactly the
It's,
same thing.
that's all you have in this world. Like, I know people who have a lot of money,
Yeah,
like a lot. And even then, you know, time is the biggest thing that these,
you don't have the time.
and I think it's also one of the reasons. So it's almost a feedback loop though, because if you have time to focus on the things that matter to you and are going to move the needle for you, then that allows you to do your best work, which makes you more successful. So it's a feedback, but it's a very, I would say, that's an unusual thing to say, and probably from a position of good fortune where a lot of people just aren't there, right? And like I know what it's like too, because working a 9 to 5 is you clock in, you clock out, and you do your job. But as you point out, there's a lot of things outside of your control, like that job could disappear, and it's happening a lot in the tech space right now. A lot.
A lot. Yeah,
Sucks.
exactly.
And I know people
Yeah.
like they can't find, it's been a year and they've still been looking for work and they can't find
Yep.
anything. It's super common.
Yep, I've seen that happen. I've seen that happen with my friends. I will say to that that I found that there's a lot of interest in the non-tech space, who is probably a decade or so behind with respect to the like development of new technologies. Like a
Mhm.
lot of these companies are still, they have an on-prem old data warehouse running on SQL Server or something like that. And there's an opportunity there for someone who knows some of the more latest stuff, the cloud stuff, to sort of help them move to that end. So I would recommend people look outside the tech space. You know, you don't have to be
Yeah.
always on the leading edge of technology um,
No,
to
boring's
be
back, dude. Like, yeah, you're absolutely right. There's a lot of, like, I
the
would say
boring is back.
boring
Yeah.
companies that are they're doing well, they're profitable, and
Yep.
and I think it's funny because I think those kind of companies had sort of an ick factor to them,
Hmm.
during the good old days. But
Hmm.
I'm even seeing like VCs and techies talk about how they just want to start a restaurant or a profitable business and bootstrap things now, and like they're kind of done with the whole
Yep.
you know
Laundromat or
yeah, learner mat, nothing wrong with that. I mean, somebody asked, I was in Palo Alto last weekend, and one of my friends asked, what would I do if I wasn't, doing what I'm doing? And I said I'd probably actually go and work, as a general contractor or, construction, because I think like that's,
yeah,
um, I don't know, it's pretty pure work. You just build things and then you're
exactly.
done, right? And like, I don't, I yeah, I mean, I used to be a floor installer back in the day, so I
Yeah.
kind of miss those
There's no
days.
shame in that. There is
No,
no
dude, there's
shame.
not at all. I mean, I tell my kids too, like, there's,
Yeah.
alternate thing you could do and just skip college is go to trade school and learn to be an electrician or a plumber or something like that. Like these jobs make a lot of money and you
Almost are
can,
raking in the dough.
dude, I mean, it's disgusting work. I've done plumbing,
Yep.
but
Yep.
it's yeah, good money for that, man. I mean, yeah, you try and find anyone to help you with your house these days. It's like it's hard because
It,
people aren't going
they're
into it.
booked.
They're so booked.
They're fully booked.
Yeah. Like I have an electrician coming here today and it's like $200 just to show up. And I'm like, not bad.
Wow.
Something happened, like a
Wow.
fuse blew out and I was like, I don't
Yep.
even know which one it is. So I'm not gonna mess with it. So um, but that's just how it is. Yeah. So I think
Yep.
that the career thing too is like the other thing I would say is just is that even or do you even are you even sure you're in the right field? Not you, but like the audience. Like that's a question you really need to
Mm-hmm.
like, reassess once in a while. Is like because it's funny,
Right.
no matter the skill level or the title, like I talk to people of all um walks of life and stuff, and overwhelmingly I feel like a lot of people are confused about sort of the direction they want to go with their career and with their lives. And I'm like,
Mhm.
that's and these people who've held like very impressive titles at some of the biggest companies in the world. And it's like even then it's like these people are, just like, I don't know. Is there something else you could be
They're
doing?
facing the question of what's next.
Yeah,
It's a tough question.
this is what it is.
Uh, yeah, and I wrote about that. I wrote just a very quick message last time, which is one of the things that I like to do is to just explore the world of possibilities while I am still employed, and if
Smart.
possible, work on a project that's mutually beneficial both to me and to my company, where
Yeah.
I'm learning something new, they're getting something in return, and voila, I learned machine learning and data science.
Yep.
Voila, I learned something else, right? While I'm still employed, and maybe when I do this stuff, I sort of decide that okay, maybe this career isn't for me, but maybe I want to try something else. But can you explore that while you're still employed, as
Yeah.
opposed to, quitting your job, going to school, getting some degree, and then hoping that the piece of paper is going to help you get a job? It's not.
Yeah.
It's the experience. If you actually have done it before, then you know what the problems are, and you can go into let's say a new company and say, "Hey, I've done this before. I can do this for you."
Yeah.
Right? As opposed to, I have a piece of paper that says I have a certificate in this one thing.
Oh yeah, I was talking to this kid last night at a party. He was in his sophomore year in biomedical engineering over at the university near me, and I was like, "So what do you do? What do you like to do during the summers?" And he's like, "Well, I'm probably gonna go like work on being a rafting guide or something." I was like, "That's cool, but I think you should start focusing on getting internships, and because
Mhm.
like the job market is just highly competitive, and just because you got a degree, I think you're in for a rude awakening if you think you're gonna
Yep.
just waltz in
Yep.
the door with your new degree.
Absolutely.
That's every graduate. I was like, get an edge, build your network, build some skills, and you'll be a lot more marketable when you're on the on the job
Yep.
market. So that was, I don't know how he took that, but I was like, I just know because I talk to a lot of college students, and that the biggest question these days is, the job market's not what it used to be. Like, how am I going to stand out? And I'm like, you're absolutely right. What you mentioned is just go out there and get the skills. That's pretty,
Get the skill. Do a project while you're at school. Get an internship if it's possible. Anything that's like real world experience where you can demonstrate real world experience. Employers don't care about your degree. They care about what you can do for them. They
bingo.
they care about the fact that you've done this sort of thing before. You know what the problems are, and you can replicate it for them
Yeah,
and bring them some value, hopefully.
just that easy. So,
Yeah.
well, awesome. It was good chatting with you, man. I'll have you back on
Yeah,
at
I'm
some
glad we
point.
did
But
this.
for people who want to learn more about you, where can they find you?
So I'm usually active on social media on Twitter or X. Not as much these days. I'm more on LinkedIn, but on both platforms, the username is the same. It's at Ergest X, ERGESTX. You can find me with that same name on Substack as well. But on
Nice.
Substack, I post at SQLpatterns.com, or ergestx.substack.com is the like the subdomain. And yeah, feel free to connect with me, send me a message. I kind of like people that take the initiative and send a message before sending a request for connect, because I see a lot of those, and I have to sort of protect that. There's a maximum of how many you can have on LinkedIn,
Oh yeah.
and I'm trying to protect that. But yeah, feel free to reach out. Those that are motivated will find a way. And I sort of leave it up to them. I don't, I make myself available to people
Yeah.
who want any sort of advice, or they want to learn from me. But you have to put in some effort. You have to put in the work.
That's a
But
good
yeah, so
policy.
yeah, those are the channels. I don't have anything on YouTube. I have a couple of videos that were workshops. So if you search for my name on YouTube, I have some videos that were workshops that Census, this company, ran with me. And you'll find I have a video on data modeling, one on my book, and the third video that I don't remember exactly what it was. But yeah, you can find a lot of my content is available for free.
Awesome. Awesome. We'll put that in the show notes. All right. It's good to see you. We'll talk
Good
later.
to see you, man.
Take care.
All right. Take care.